Hello and welcome to another edition of Heart of Healthcare. My name is Dr. Jan Bonifer, and these podcasts are about helping physicians restore balance in their lives so we can co-create a medical system that benefits everyone. A quick reminder that you can find more information about our nonprofit Heart-Based Medicine and the work we do to support healthcare professionals at heartbasedmedicine.org.
The Heart of Healthcare Podcast, Series 1, Episode 8, when we're asking, how do healthcare professionals listen without prejudice?
We were given 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. All patients want to feel that they've been heard, and this can be a crucial gateway to healing. Are we listening closely enough to our patients and each other as healthcare professionals? Please allow me to introduce my friends Kavita Chinayan and Dan Dinnenberg to another episode and 3 questions that we want to discuss today. Hi, Kavita.
Hi, Ian. Hi, Dan. Good to see you both.
Hey, Dan.
Hey, Kavita. Hi, Jan. Such a pleasure to be back to talk to you guys.
Great. So let's dive straight into it. So the first question is, how can we ensure that we listen deeply and compassionately to our patients and make sure the information we impart is clearly understood, even in difficult situations?
Well, if I can start off.
Go ahead.
I think listening is an art, actually, and it's something that some people are inherently gifted with, and others, many of us, have to cultivate it. It's a skill that we need to cultivate, because it's not just about time, which of course there is a time crunch. When we are working in corporate medicine, so to speak, we have limited amount of time, to speak with patients and to get a history and to listen and all of that. Time is one thing, but the other thing is also our stance and presence, and how present we are. Because a lot of times, this presence, or to be present with someone, you can be absolutely present with someone and have only 5 minutes, and they still feel like they're heard. And if you're not present, you can have tons of time, and they still don't feel heard. So it's whether we feel rushed within ourselves, and whether we have the openness and the willingness to kind of allow that communication to touch us deeply. And so that openness is a stance on our part. And it's hard. I think it's very difficult to be that open all the time, because as soon as you meet someone, we kind of bring our own kind of biases, and then we bring our own inherent, sometimes when you meet someone and they come in with a certain stance, you don't feel open enough with that person. And to remain open, regardless of what the other person is doing, I think it's a skill that takes cultivation.
Yeah, wow, don't we all know that? Don't we all know that situation that we have learned to ask questions, and often we have learned to ask those questions in a structured way. So we're kind of pursuing a purpose. We have an aim. We want to, let's say, be very effective at building a differential diagnosis. So we're actually not listening. So for example, if we're saying, how are you today? In a way, what we're hope for is that we get the lead complaint, or the main complaint, the present complaint, that comes out first. And then we kind of build our differential diagnosis around it, or we start to. So it's kind of a structured, intentional, directive, almost strategic kind of listening. And what you're describing is another kind of listening that really isn't strategic, if I hear you correctly, Kavita.
Yeah, it's actually listening, between the lines, so to speak, because there is so much of communication that is nonverbal. It is it is in the way somebody in front of you is sitting or standing, or their posture, and the kind of body language they use, and their emotion, their facial expression, and whether or not they feel like they're being heard. You can see that in their stance. And it can be a structured interview, and you've seen this, I think. A lot of residents and trainees feel like, they go in and take a history, and then the attending goes in and takes a history, and the patient says completely different things, right? And
isn't that annoying as a resident?
Right? And it's frustrating for trainees. And I think that's not necessarily, like open stance on the part of the attending. It's just that the patient or the person in front of you changes their stance when they think this is a trainee versus when they think this is the boss. So a lot of these kinds of, subtleties are happening in any given interaction. And to be able to catch those, I think, first of all, I think it's something that most of us develop through maturity and just growing up. And a lot of it is something that needs to be cultivated through, working on ourselves and reorienting ourselves to where we are, rather than being rushed into, I need to finish this and go on to the next thing. So there is also that.
Yeah, Dan, so Kavita is highlighting time, stance, and presence as three kind of key characteristics that kind of qualify deep listening versus, let's say, active listening, which we've all learned, right? We've all learned active listening, kind of to repeat in our own words and kind of make sure that the patient feels heard and seen, and we actually picked up everything, as we are sometimes missing stuff. But what we're talking here is more than that. So we're talking about a genuine interest to learn and to get to know the patient, and that's something we need to cultivate and culture. How does this sit with you, Dan? What is your experience in kind of growing into this, and what does it take for you to learn continuously, as I guess we all do?
I really appreciate the differentiation that we're making, because there's so much subtlety in this. And even us as physicians having this conversation, this is pushing forward the idea of listening to a totally different level. Most people are coming through and have an agenda. It's much more about, a diagnosis and a plan and a speech than listening at all. And so even us having this conversation of the subtleties, whether it be, deep listening versus, this idea of what we're saying is we're bringing presence, we're bringing curiosity, we're bringing the person themselves into the experience of their diagnosis. And I think that's the opportunity of what you're talking about with the listening. And I think, you kind of differentiated and said active listening. Yes, I understand that most of us have gained some skills in sort of, let's say, reflective listening or paraphrasing or explaining that. Yes, but what Kavita gives the opportunity for is bringing presence and bringing the sanctuary of being seen, heard, and witnessed as a person, to let that come into the diagnosis. And so it's not necessarily just a one-size-fits-all, this is the diagnosis, and I'm giving my speech about whether it be diabetes or congestive heart failure. This is ultimately this person, with whether they're married or not, whether they have kids or not, whether what this means for their life and their goals and their meaning and their purpose. This is a very, very special moment where this person is hearing something for the very first time. And I love the word cultivation, because I think that all of us have the opportunity to cultivate this in ourselves and what we can bring to that. I think the challenge is again, we kind of have highlighted together before, but it's like, in a sort of a corporate model, or a model in which the person in front of you is a diagnostic code or a certain amount of time in your day, of course that we're not going to be able to come at that with the same presence, because you kind of have to get through your day. I don't know if you noticed this, but if you talk to some colleagues, I'm definitely more in the, psycho-spiritual and the mental emotional. And my colleagues would always ask me well, what do you do if they start crying in your office? As if that opening, which for me was, I won't say the goal, but it just happens when you truly listen, and you listen and give someone this opportunity to be heard and to share. And within that, sometimes tears and real emotions come up. But my colleagues are actually very nervous about that, because it's very difficult to basically close the door on a situation where someone's really emotional. And so the opportunity for what we're talking about of bringing themselves into it, I think for many people that are in a structured day and are trying to meet the number of patients and trying to deliver exactly what they want to deliver, it actually is an antithesis to what they're trying to create, because bringing that timing and the curiosity brings the unknowing, the uncertainty of what and how to end the conversation, to kind of close the door, to write an ICD-10 code, and to kind of, programatize this person and this emotion and this narrative of what they're dealing with into something like a distinct soundbite and move on.
Thank you, Jen. It's so interesting. It kind of works both ways. So I think what you're highlighting now is that the way we listen actually changes something in the other. So that is really important. So that if I'm truly interested, if I'm truly wanting to, I love your words, bring the patient in the experience of the diagnosis, that's so beautiful, to actually be with what is going on, whether it's not so much the term or the ICD code, but the experience of what we then, give it a name to. And it also works the other way around. So not only by deep listening do we actually empower the patient, and we're actually learning more things from the patient, as Kavita highlighted, once the senior comes in, we get this whole different story. That's not just because they're telling a different story, it's because there's a different listening that kind of almost triggers or elicits a different kind of experience, and it elicits a different kind of talking. This also works the other way around in really difficult situations, and I wonder how you deal with that. So did you ever experience kind of the extreme of being bullied or intimidated within your profession? And how did you deal with that?
Absolutely.
Go ahead.
Absolutely. That has happened. By patients, is that what you mean?
Yeah, well, I guess both. I mean, this phenomenon is true with patients and with colleagues, but it's just the kind of listening, the kind of talking. So we actually influence each other. And if we fine tune ourselves as a diagnostic instrument beyond the kind of Rogers, reflective conversation, but actually, going to that level that we're talking about. Take it away, Kavita.
Yes. I mean, so this is what I was saying earlier, is that, people, whatever the other person is bringing to it, the way I look at it is, whatever is going on in front of me should be irrelevant to how open I am. Whether that's a language of bullying or language of whatever it is, can I still be present with it? Can I still be open with it? That doesn't mean, you need to be a doormat, right? In any context. And this is, this applies to all areas of life, not just in a doctor-patient relationship. I could still deal with that bullying in a different way, when I'm present and I'm not reactive. Instead, I'm just responding to that energy in a different way and saying, well, you must be having a bad day, or tell me what's going on, right? Can I put that emotionality aside and listen? And then if that still isn't working, then, there is always the possibility of the a degradation of a doctor-patient relationship and trust. And that can happen for infinite number of reasons. And if that happens, fine. You just say, well, maybe I can refer you to somebody else who might be better suited for you as a doctor. And that's fine too. Nothing is personal here, right? So what I'm saying is, I think, like everybody else, we are human too. And, the more work we do upon ourselves in being open and cultivating a stance of openness and, the ability to listen, that's what we'll bring to our profession too. And that's what we'll bring to every conversation, and have the ability to listen in deeper and deeper ways. So, of course, these things do happen, bullying and emotionality and sentimentality. As Dan was saying, people can cry, people can yell, all these things happen. So,
an important, thank you, Kavita, such an important point. So now here the critical thing for me is, how can we actually learn to listen regardless of the stance that is coming our way, if we like, the vibes coming our way? How can we actually listen and not close down? So what then happens typically is that now we're acting professionally, which means we're kind of equating that with shutting our hearts. While here actually we're suggesting the opposite. So that something is coming that triggers a reaction, we're noticing that reaction, and we're kind of going all in with our heart and kind of offer that space to the patient to really have the experience that they have with us, even though there's bullying or intimidation. So we can set limits, we can kind of stay in our integrity and yet be heart open. That is something that, at least for me, really took time to learn, kind of to not close down or be neutral.
And it's a process, it's really difficult. It's very easy to talk about it in a situation like this, but when you are caught up in that, it's really difficult to not react, right? And to remain professional but still be open and realize that nothing is about you actually. And so every reaction that anybody has, it's always about themselves. It's never about you, and it's never personal. And to understand that, it takes time. It takes a lot of cultivation. And in societies where litigation is an issue, a patient can sue you if they don't like your face, and if they don't like the way you said hello. You can be sued for that, and because people can find problems when there is none, and so to remain open, it's challenging. But for me, that is my spiritual practice. Is to remain open and to muster up presence and openness and awareness, no matter what the situation.
Fabulous. Dan, what about you? Tell me about how do you actually create that environment of trust, sincerity, where you feel you're authentic, you remain authentic, and yet you stay heart open?
Yeah, and even hearing that, it's such an amazing journey. And I think what you and Kavita are alluding to is very true. It is a personal journey, and as Kavita said, it's her spiritual practice. I think that it took years and years of being able to hold that. It's being able to hold that reaction, or noticing that reaction, or your own patterning, and understanding something, and still being able to hold presence. And so it's over time, it's like the challenging of all of us. We're in relationship and we get triggered and we want to act a certain way, but we just pause and we bring presence and we bring awareness. And then over time, we're able to come at that in a different way. And so I think that what's happening and what we're alluding to is that, by the very nature of the profession and what we've talked about, the training and who comes into the training, I don't think we're picking the people that are most suited, that have done the most personal work. In fact, in some ways, you're actually choosing a group of people that have actually pushed away any possibility for personal work and really done this rigorous academic training and really kind of taken their own experience. And so those of us kind of, here are very special beings that are able to kind of bring that generosity and bring that heart opening into a professionalism and really kind of be able to kind of balance and bridge intellectual diagnostics, treatment plans in this heart-opening way. And I think that's a very important place for us to all be able to cultivate. A question that you asked Kavita, which was really interesting about the bullying or the intimidation, when you were saying that, what came to mind to me was, after listening to patients and hearing a constellation of symptoms, I really start to understand what they're going through, because all of a sudden someone would be talking about all of their symptoms that, let's say, lead up to what they think is, let's say, a chronic Lyme diagnosis or an adrenal fatigue diagnosis. These sort of diagnoses that are not actually very well, I'll say, understood, but also accepted by a mainstream conventional medical practice. And so what I notice in that intimidation that I kind of feel is, so all of a sudden I'm listening deeply to my patient and they're just telling me a bunch of symptoms. I don't care what it's called, but now I'm talking to a specialist. As an integrative holistic family doc, I'm sometimes talking to a specialist and saying, hey, you're an endocrinologist. Everything they're talking about is kind of this adrenal fatigue. Where do you think this is coming from? And it's like, oh no, we don't accept that. Or, oh no, chronic Lyme from an infectious disease, we don't accept that as a diagnosis. And it's a very structured shutting down. But what I notice as I'm saying that to them is that's the same shutting down that this patient has achieved over and over and over again within medicine, which is ultimately why someone like that has found me, because they're looking for someone to listen to them, to understand them and try to help them and navigate and guide them through what has become a healing journey. And so that same intimidation or bullying ends up becoming as a colleague, where you're kind of being shut down for something, for believing your patient. So it's a really unique place where you're becoming an advocate because of your deep listening. And because of hearing a constellation of symptoms, now you believe. And so now you take that and you're like, I don't care what we are calling things, but I'm getting multiple patients that are describing a certain thing. What do you think this is? And all of a sudden you're getting shut down by your own colleagues that are unwilling to dive deep into kind of the understanding of what that is.
That is a sign of chronic fatigue, isn't it? That's a sign of that's a sign of when we're overwhelmed, right? When we're overwhelmed, then one of the ways to kind of navigate through our lives is by saying, well, that's not part of my reality, therefore it doesn't exist. At least I found myself doing that quite a bit when I was kind of, sleep deprived, and at some point you just go, well, we don't know about that. Let's stick to what we know, right? And then basically that curiosity that we talked about is such an healing and empowering experience for the patient. That same curiosity we don't bring to our own process of learning because of our own shutdownness, because we've kind of sacrificed curiosity for survival or for protectionism, in the face of litigation, as Kavita pointed out. And isn't it amazing that we totally accept being trained and taught, in, let's say, textbook content, and we also totally accept being taught how a certain machine or medical device works, and we all agree that that's necessary. But we are actually trained to not learn to get to know ourselves as a diagnostic tool and as a treatment tool. So yes, we do get to know that as far as clinical, as far as clinical examination and listening goes as a strategic approach. Kind of, yes, we learn to use the stethoscope and we learn to tune our ears. So in that sense, we learn to tune ourselves, but we're not learning to tune ourselves as, if you like, beyond the 5 senses that are described in the textbook. And you, Dan, described so well that that's actually so much needed, that this really provides the patient with the possibility to experience the diagnosis and go through a healing process that is owned rather than kind of put on top or superimposed, I guess.
I mean, it's remarkable, and it's really exciting times because there's so many aspects of what's going on in medicine. I think, like in many aspects of technology influencing what we're doing, I'm seeing, again, a lot of companies, a lot of medical companies that are using machine learning to try to kind of help in sort of the coaching aspect of certain chronic disease states. And while that's exciting, it becomes an algorithmic data in, and then there's an algorithm of what gets pushed back to it. Like, someone says this, and then, okay, we're going to set, this is the follow-up that these people are going to get. And what could be missing in that is this conversation, is when you listen deeply, or you create that pause, and someone can start to reflect and find the truth of what's going on with themselves just because they're mirror or reflected by another person. Now they're uncovering something that they didn't even know about themselves. And so you, as someone in relationship, is allowing and facilitating this opening up of something that they didn't even know was within themselves. And that is a piece that is going to be very difficult to capture in sort of an algorithmic machine learning. And so it's also the opportunity for us to start to realize where our place is. And that, as you said, these technologies that exist within us, like intuition, like the deep listening and the subtleties that Kavita said, is looking at your patient, understanding with their body language or the way that they're taking that in, and understanding where and how they're understanding what you're saying. Because I think one of the things that happens is you could find a practitioner that feels really good. This happens a lot of times in the very difficult diagnoses. I know we've been through that, where you're telling someone something that is very difficult to hear. Well, if you've ever been through that, you might think, I'm going to give them the staging of their cancer diagnosis, and then I'm going to give them the probable treatment, and then maybe the outcomes, and you realize that within the first 14 seconds, they're completely shut down because you've just delivered earth-shattering, life-changing news. And if you don't stop there and you think that you're being a great clinician by going through the rest of it, you lost them. You've lost them at that moment. And so just pausing there, because everything else maybe needs to be said at some point in the next 6 months, but not at that moment. And it's the listening and understanding of what's going on with the person in front of you that really is going to give you the sense of what else to say.
What a powerful example, Dan, where breaking bad news is so often taught as a technique to convey information. While what you're saying really is that breaking bad news should be a technique to listen more and understand more about the patient and really take ourselves back. So Kavita has highlighted that it's a process to learn, and it's a process to grow and cultivate this skill over here, during years of practice. I just wonder, could there be tips and tricks or techniques for compassionate communication that we can suggest for those starting out? So could we kind of provide a bit of a jump start for those who are interested in the theme and may want to kind of progress a little faster in their careers, to learn to listen deeply and have the patient go through this experience?
It's an amazing opportunity. I think the way that begins, Jan, is is listening to ourselves. And so those of us in this field start to listen to ourselves, and there's an inner landscape that we start to cultivate. And whether it be through our meditation practice or simply our presence to understanding what's coming up for ourselves is really the place to start that journey. And so what we talked about before is there's sort of what Kavita called a spiritual practice, but just noticing your own reaction, noticing what's coming up, and being able to smile at what you're noticing and to become present with it and not allow that to knee-jerk or to be an impulse into anything else. And once we start to really cultivate that within ourselves, then we can bring that ripple out into others. And so there are definitely skills that we could continue to share, and it would be wonderful to be able to do that. And I'm happy to kind of work with you and kind of find those skills for others that are interested in this art of listening and cultivation and presence, because it's so important. Jan, as we're talking about this, it reminds me, early on in my career, I came across this Rachel Naomi Remen quote that just always has stuck with me around deep listening. And it's a beautiful testament to the simplicity and complexity of listening. She says, "Listening is the oldest and perhaps the most powerful tool of healing. It is often through the quality of our listening and not the wisdom of our words that we are able to affect the most profound changes in the people around us. When we listen, we offer with our attention an opportunity for wholeness. Our listening creates a sanctuary for the homeless parts within the other person, that which has been denied, unloved, devalued by themselves and others, that which is hidden. In this culture, the soul and the heart too often go homeless. Listening creates a holy silence. When you listen generously to people, they can hear the truth in themselves, often for the first time. And in the silence of listening, you can know yourself in everyone. Eventually, you may be able to hear in everyone and beyond everyone the unseen singing softly to itself and to you."
Fabulous, yeah. Thank you. So we have touched on a lot of those issues today, and a lot of the rationale of the why and the benefits, and how we can actually not only empower the patient in their healing journey, but actually also walk away of a day of listening and providing care and energized rather than drained and depleted and being into delivery routines, but actually be nourished by the curiosity that we experience. So, whoa, time flies when we go deep. So thank you. Thanks for being on the show. And I hope you enjoyed that chat with Kavita and Dan. And you can find more information at heartbasedmedicine.org. And I deeply appreciate if you could click subscribe on whatever platform you're listening to this podcast on. Until next time, thanks for listening.
We hope you can join us for the next podcast in our Heart of Healthcare series, when we'll be asking what changes need to be made to hospitals so they can become actual centers of healing. If you like this series, you might also enjoy our accompanying book, Dare to Care, on Amazon. Join the Heart of Healthcare discussion at heartbasedmedicine.org, where you'll find lots more interesting interviews, articles, and training materials. See you there.
This has been a Heart-Based Medicine production. Thanks for listening.